If you've been following the news lately, it feels like you're just getting hit with wave after wave of economic doom and gloom, right? Headlines screaming about crisis, about collapse. Honestly, it's exhausting. But what if that's not the whole story? What if there's something else going on? Well, let's dive into some new data that paints a very, very different picture. I mean, that old saying feels like it was written for today, doesn't it? The algorithms, the headlines, they all seem designed to spark outrage, to keep us glued to the negative stuff. So it's pretty easy to start believing that, maybe our best days really are behind us when that's all you hear.
Because that's exactly the argument in the source material we're breaking down today. It makes the case that if you actually look past all the noise, past the sensationalism, and just look at the cold, hard facts, a story of genuine stability and maybe even renewed prosperity is starting to take shape. The big takeaway: the good news might finally be here, and it's actually backed by data.
So for months, the dominant story, the one we've all been hearing, has been pretty clear. Pundits were predicting a deep, nasty recession for Canada. They pointed to high interest rates, global instability, and they basically told us all to brace for impact. But then, the third quarter numbers for 2025 dropped. And they didn't just defy those pessimistic predictions. They kind of blew right past them. The data started showing a resilience that, frankly, very few people saw coming. And let's start with what might be the most important number of all. Now, you might hear the term GDP and your eyes just kind of glaze over. It's just a big abstract number. But GDP per capita, now that's different. This is the one that really truly matters for your wallet. It tells us if we as individuals are actually getting wealthier on average. If this number goes up, it means we're not just treading water, we're actually moving forward. And this right here is the headline. For the first time since before all the pandemic chaos, our national output is finally growing faster than our population. The source we're looking at calls this the end of the per-person recession. And that's not just a number on a spreadsheet, that's the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a real sign that things are genuinely starting to get better. Okay, so another big part of the negative story was this idea that Canadian industry was dead, right? That we don't make anything anymore. Well, check this out. Manufacturing sales jumped 3.3% in September. That number means assembly lines are moving, goods are being shipped out, and Canadian workers are earning good wages. It's the sign of a real manufacturing renaissance. And then came this, which you could only really call a jobs miracle. With interest rates so high, everyone, and I mean everyone, expected unemployment to start creeping up. Instead, Canada added a surprise 67,000 jobs in a single month. This absolutely stunned economists. Here's the thing. Businesses just don't create jobs at that pace unless they feel pretty confident about the future. So the big point is this. This success wasn't some kind of accident. So, according to the analysis we're exploring, this turnaround is the direct result of a very deliberate, very fundamental policy shift in Ottawa. They call it the Carney Doctrine. Let's take a quick look at what that actually means. The shift is pretty huge. It's a move away from simply spending on social programs, which are often funded by adding to the national debt, to what's called stimulus spending. So what that really means is investing in assets. Things like the great nation-building projects of the past. It's a pivot from increasing our long-term liabilities to actually creating projects that generate real wealth for the country. And here are some of the specifics. There's a new Buy Canadian rule, which legally requires the government to prioritize Canadian companies for contracts. The idea is to keep our tax dollars circulating right here at home. They've also streamlined the approval process to finally unlock the mineral wealth in the Ring of Fire. Construction is now actually set for 2026. And on top of that, new tax credits are successfully pulling in billions in global investment. Now, to really appreciate Canada's position, the source argues we have to look south, because what we're seeing is an almost unprecedented split between our two economies. Canada seems to be charting a very different course from the United States right now. I mean, just look at this comparison. The source notes that while Prime Minister Carney is flying to the UAE and Europe to sign new investment deals, the US is getting tangled up in what it calls a tariff disaster, which is basically just a tax on its own consumers. And the result? Major US companies are slashing jobs, their market has totally flatlined, while Canada's continues this surprising growth. It's a really stark contrast. Okay, I know what you're thinking. That's all great, but what about the prices I'm paying at the grocery store, right? It's the one issue that hits closest to home for everybody, and the source dives right into the nuances behind that sticker shock. So first, the really good news. The fire of inflation that was raging 2 years ago, it's largely being put out. The overall inflation rate has fallen all the way down to 2.2%, which is right inside the Bank of Canada's target range. Those scary 8% spikes, they're gone. We are back to more normal levels of price stability.
But, and this is a big but, the story isn't the same everywhere, and that's why it can still feel painful. As this chart shows, some key costs are way down. Gasoline has fallen almost 8% over the last year, which is a huge relief. But other things, especially food, are staying stubbornly high for some very specific reasons. And that really gets to the core of the argument here. You'll hear angry voices telling you it's all just taxes. But the reality is, it's more complicated. The price of beef is way up because droughts drove up the cost of feed for farmers. That's just basic economics, not some kind of political conspiracy. As the source bluntly puts it, you can't axe the tax on a drought.
So, what does this all mean for the road ahead? Well, the argument is that Canada is building its future on a foundation of stability, and that very stability is fast becoming our greatest competitive advantage on the world stage.
So to just quickly recap the evidence, GDP per capita, the number that matters for our wallets, is finally rising. Manufacturing is bouncing back. The job market is incredibly strong. Policy has shifted to focus on long-term investment, not just short-term spending. Inflation is back in its box, and our relative political stability is like a magnet for capital that's fleeing uncertainty elsewhere. The big takeaway here? Canada is building a foundation of stability, and that is becoming a major, major competitive advantage.
And all of that leaves us with this one last, really provocative question. Is what we're seeing just a temporary blip, a short-term split between Canada and the US? Or could this be a fundamental, permanent shift in how North America works? It's a huge question, and it's definitely something worth thinking about as we watch these two very different economic stories continue to unfold.